Jordan Peterson loves to talk. He'll talk about anything that he can spin with big words and strange messages. He especially loves to talk on Twitter. He has lots of fun there getting ratioed whenever he got blueballed by a swimsuit magazine. After announcing that he would leave Twitter, he tweeted many times a day until he got banned. As a blatantly transphobic tweet finally tipped the, granted incredibly inconsistent, moderation policies with Twitter. Or maybe they just wanted to help him out, seeing how badly he seems to want to get out of there. Anyways, Peterson is no stranger to capitalizing on some tasty controversy. It's kind of his thing. So he made a video calling out the woke moralists. I'm not going to talk about that video though, because he made another one, probably because the first one got like 3 million views. I want to talk about this one because it feels a bit more unhinged, a lot more dressed up and not part of a stupid tweet that feels suspiciously influenced by joining Ben Shapiro's news show. This video is very goofy and easy to laugh at, but it also has a kind of weird elitist message that I want to highlight and dissect a little. I apologize in advance. What he says can be easily confusing and takes forever to come out of his mouth. Not because you are stupid or anything, but because he's annoying. You'll see what I mean later on, but for now, let's just watch funny, overly verbose Kermit with a cold.
I am reading some of the pieces that I'm producing, and that means that these are things that I wrote. The reason I'm doing that rather than speaking extemporaneously is...
This is something he loves to do. Extemporaneously? I mean, I like big words. I think they're kind of funny, but what the hell? Why don't you extemporaneously suck my nuts and let it speak even slightly concisely for once? This is ridiculous.
So today I'm going to read a piece that I entitled, Why Twitter is Insane.
Ah, Jesus, Peterson, warm me up a little. What's with the jump scare? Can I think of a less sudden title card?
The eminent social psychologist Jonathan Haidt recently wrote a hard-hitting article showing that use of certain forms of social media, particularly by girls just entering adolescence, was directly and causally associated with higher rates of depression and depression-related symptoms.
To his credit, the study is pretty important. It's given us a clear answer to what most people already thought. Social media is bad for young people, particularly girls, as it exacerbates capacities for exclusion and fears of missing out. Notice something? Yep, the study's about teenagers, well, even younger than teenagers. Comparing demographics, Twitter clearly is skewed older, and the female demographic is lower than most other platforms. Teenagers don't go to Twitter to talk to their friends usually, they go to Instagram for that, see all the fun the friends might be having without them. Nevertheless, the study is clearly not about 60-year-old men. It's not about you, Peterson.
Imagine, for example, that you learned a particular pattern of communication in your family, one that when used on others triggered a passive or even outright aggressive resistance. By definition, the unusual method of communication you had been taught, one that did not generalize well to the broader social environment, would characterize you, at least as far as society is concerned, as insane.
Alright, there's a bit to unpack here. A lot of weird assumptions. He's clearly equating this hypothetical family that I guess grunts or something to Twitter. He says so later. God, it's such a stupid thought experiment. What method of communication is he talking about? Banging on the ground? Flinging feces? Maybe strange grunts? I can't imagine a way of using language that would get a passive or aggressive reaction other than what people like Peterson do on Twitter. You know, just insulting entire groups of people. This stupid thought experiment describes himself attacking transgender people and getting pushback for it. Unless he is describing socially awkward people getting a passively awkward response as insane, you can't so vaguely describe this experiment when you present the result as harshly as calling the supposed family insane.
The first way is in the manner in which it bypasses the traditional means for measuring the quality of communication. In the real world, high-volume communication is extremely costly, requiring both hard-to-establish credibility, why otherwise would large numbers of people want to read or listen to you, and access to the wealth necessary for such communication.
Now this is where the strange elitist classist argument starts to form in this video. According to Peterson, before Twitter and other similar sites, one could only be heard by many if they had credibility and were privileged. I don't know where this is coming from. I mean, he's like half right. You definitely needed money, or someone else's money, but you didn't really need credibility. People didn't turn onto a channel immediately off of it if the presenter only had a bachelor's or something. People want to read or listen to people because of what they are saying, not why they are saying it. This supposed credibility was instead decided by whoever held the money or privilege that you were talking about, which was almost never those speaking to the large audience. it was the publisher of the book or the channel that hosted the show. It's another useless argument that thrives in flowery, confusing sentences which seemingly never give genuine reasons for it. Now, Peterson speaks incredibly slowly and annoyingly, so I'm just going to cut out a lot of the pauses between what he says. Know that I'm not actually taking words away from what he's saying, so I'm not taking them out of context or anything. It's just really annoying.
The consequence of this demolition of potentially vital regulation.
Alright, so Peterson describes the requirement of both publisher-decided credibility and that capital required to reach large groups as vital. He clearly does not like that anyone can create an audience, supposedly without credibility or money? I could understand the argument that an audience gained without genuine growth shouldn't happen, but I doubt that really happens on Twitter. What can facilitate disingenuous growth of an individual's audience is plopping some dumbass in front of a camera and broadcasting them to millions for no reason other than that they played lacrosse with your son at an expensive university. Which is a scenario that can come about almost only due to the barrier of money, and that money decides the credibility of the person, or more accurately, who the person is.
The second way is how anyone, regardless of competence or social status, can comment to anyone else's entire network of followers merely by commenting on something the latter posted. That same commenter therefore can access all those who have chosen to follow not them, but the target of their, say, insult and derision, without having demonstrated any of the competence necessary to have attracted such attention on their own.
So this is a pretty long clip that kind of says the same thing over and over. Peterson is still really sad about that time everyone called him a creep for letting us know what he doesn't want to pull his pud to. Notice the first thing he said: regardless of competence or social status. Social status is a stupid, archaic way of thinking, a stupid hierarchy that is effectively synonymous with wealth. It's already a part of social media. Celebrities that are traditionally high on the whole social status thing have lots of followers, and their replies get considerably more engagement than average. Normal people have like 2 followers. They only get high engagement if what they say is genuinely funny and validated by other people, or in other words, deemed competent by the readers. What Jordan Peterson truly seems to dislike about Twitter is the fact that instead of rich people deciding what is competent enough to be shown, it's the average person hitting a retweet button or a little heart. He also can't handle that other people with followings can dunk on other people and give their audiences access to them. Which can be a genuine problem, I'll give him that, but usually just amounts to someone saying something stupid and suffering consequences for their actions. Though it can legitimately be attacks on others, often marginalized people, the fact that they are marginalized. Although I doubt that's what he's truly afraid of.
This democratization of communication enables a parasitism completely divorced from competence. It massively inflates noise relative to signal, bypassing all the screening mechanisms that have been so painstakingly developed to shield us from incessant racket in the real world.
More elitist bullshit. My favorite. The stupidly verbose sentence is basically saying the same as before. Because the barriers to create content and access content are gone, incompetent people are thriving, when they would originally be just noise back in the days of screening. The old way of screening before social media was pretty much just not talking to people that you didn't want to talk to, as well as just the simple not being able to talk to someone because they're not within your current life and therefore pretty much don't exist to you. This is the entire point and draw of social medias like Twitter, to interact with people that traditional limitations of society won't let you interact with. This is just insane. It's like throwing a grenade and then complaining that it explodes. Peterson does not seem to understand why he is on Twitter or why anyone is using social media at all.
The third way Twitter breaks the norms of standard human interaction is the zero cost and even potential benefit it imposes on those who engage in flagrant ethical misconduct.
This is more of a subjective argument, but I would argue that there is still a cost to using Twitter. It takes effort to think of tweets, some less than others, and interaction with people also has a genuine mental cost, one that Peterson is constantly pointing to. And while in real life there is clearly more of a cost than that of Twitter, it's still not like a huge amount more. I mean, other than some guy stabbing you because you were mean to him, in a person-to-person conversation, it's not that much harder. You can still walk away from a conversation. You don't have to put $1 in the swear jar or anything. Words are free. And ironically, the flagrant ethical misconduct is easier to get away with, as there aren't transcripts of real-life conversation and the other person can't just bonk you with a band hammer. In contrast, on Twitter you were penalized for flagrant ethical misconduct, as Peterson found out when he tried to be a little too much of a transphobe and found out that it wasn't the Peterson brand of ethics that were enforced on Twitter.
There is no cost for insults, ad hominem attacks, and provocative statements. Incitement, in other words. People can hide behind their anonymity as well and act, if possible, even more brazenly.
Peterson, you found out that there is a cost. People clowned the shit out of you. You cried about it on Twitter and then you did it again. Twitter then soft banned you for attacking Elliot Page. The cost can be what it would be in a normal conversation, you rebutting them, or whatever you want to do. If you don't want to bother with that, you can just block them or mute them. I'll give you the anonymity thing though, that is a genuine problem, in the sense that you can just pop on over, deliver some hate speech or similarly horrible sentences, and then get out of there with no repercussions or costs.
As it denies even to competent users two of the main privileges traditionally granted to them, the presumption of innocence and the right and ability to engage in effective self-defense.
This is another thing that is really similar to life outside of social media. I've heard of rumors. It's only really a courtroom that assumes innocence. You might assume your friend is innocent, but that isn't necessarily based on truly sound logic. You could easily have the exact same entirely ineffective plea of innocence towards some person in real life that you would have on Twitter to a scary mob. It sounds more like Peterson dislikes human nature, and sure, stupid people saying dumb shit can be annoying, but you can't just scrap Twitter because you can't handle it.
The mob can say anything at all about you or your thoughts online, despite your hard-earned reputation, and there is nothing you can do about it.
Peterson is really just so sad that despite him getting his big old PhD and all of his big old books, that random teenagers on the internet can easily dismantle his arguments. There is something you can do about it, Peterson. Stop saying dumb shit on a public forum. Give genuine counter-arguments that do more than just calling those rebutting you idiots and restating the same argument you gave earlier. Just because they are teenagers that don't know how to do taxes doesn't mean they don't deserve a voice. People agree with their points, and as such, positively engage with them and possibly contribute to the argument that is opposing yours. If you can't handle this, you can disable replies, or private your account, or get banned. But that kind of does the opposite of what you really want, doesn't it, Peterson? Your brain thrives on this. You love being able to show how the cultural Marxists are attacking you, how rational thinking and traditional values are being destroyed. You want to be the visionary that shows everyone the correct way to think, to bring us back to logical objectivity and ignore the chaos.
I believe that Twitter's reward structure, even more than Facebook's, incentivizes malignant narcissism. It enables and benefits free riding and prioritizes psychopathic motivation.
Peterson is such a strange hate burner towards Twitter for some reason. His use of this argument is also just so stupid. This entire video is just I believes framed in a weirdly authoritative manner. I believe that every night you insert a Roman candle into your asshole, light it up and force your wife to watch. We're both allowed to believe what we want, Peterson. Doesn't make it true. Facebook is not the guy that you want to be pointing to right now, Peterson. Its algorithm has been shown to entirely focus on amplifying hate for engagement, and has been directly contributed to the Myanmar genocide. That's not a belief, by the way. Myanmar military members were behind it. Facebook even kind of admitted to it in a Facebook kind of way.
This is the psychological equivalent of the tragedy of the commons, the psychological equivalent to pollution of the air we all breathe.
In classic Peterson style, uses some weird pop psychology to make an even weirder leap that is easily dismissed if you can piece together what he is saying. Tragedy of the commons is so stupid. It basically says if we let people use land without paying for it, they'll overuse it as they don't have any incentive not to. It's a classic stupid thought of old white men that can only think about things in the frames of capitalism and property ownership, as if indigenous people never had this issue and they all shared the same land. And if the indigenous example doesn't work for you for some reason, there are so many instances of common land working well. Hell, it's arguably more of an anti-capitalist argument, as if the commons are regulated properly, then it doesn't matter if people want to overuse it, they just can't. But that doesn't fucking matter, because social media is not a resource that can be overused and is already regulated. It's effectively infinitely scalable, and content policies regulate how it is used. Do you want us to buy our own accounts or something? Oh, that's so stupid. How the fuck is it equivalent to breathing air? Not that many people use Twitter, and you don't die without it. Oh my god, I'm going insane.
Pinker likewise observed, quote, "The contrast between Twitter and face-to-face communication is profound. I have been astounded at how some of my students and younger colleagues think nothing of spitting utterly gratuitous and unjustified snark at respected figures in their fields, I have to remind them that they may meet these figures at a conference someday, or that they might be on their tenure or grant review committees.
Ah, my favourite. Illogical scientists implanting their own views into their field. You would never do that, would you, Peterson? I know this is just a quote, but you clearly agree with it. If a scientist can't handle not getting their ego stroked by someone, and blocks an aspiring young scientist that could very well contribute greatly to the world, I hope that they're remembered only as a bitter old person. There's a reason academia has a pretty polarizing reputation, and people like you are exactly the reason.
There also seems to be a dynamic of weaponizing social justice, so that as our society legitimately expands rights for black people, women, gay people, and transgender people, it simultaneously creates weapons for sociocultural warfare, handing aggressive professionals a moralistic cudgel with which they can demonize their competitors.
Oh, just fuck you, Peterson. You know who does use the expansion of rights for marginalized groups, namely trans people, to attack others? You piece of shit. You're only known because you demonized trans people over the C-16 bill. You only made this video because you got banned for trying to further transphobic rhetoric in order to whip up a larger fan base. Don't fucking turn around and act like the expansion of rights is actually a bad thing, you little fucking snake.
I spoke recently with the journalist Andy No about the anarchist group Antifa, for example, after being informed by some Democrats I was corresponding with that this group, Antifa, didn't really exist. I didn't know what they meant until I asked Andy how many truly active Antifa cells he thought existed in the US, and how many active full-time equivalent members each cell might have. He thought 40 cells with 20 members each. That's 800. All that damage from 800 anarchists.
So, I've got some fun background information to you wonderful watchers, my supposed undeserved audience. Jordan Peterson recently was inducted into the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's incredibly right-leaning news thingy. As soon as he says Antifa, it should be very clear that he's gone full grift for the Daily Wire. If you don't know, Antifa isn't a group, it's literally a movement. People going, I don't like the fascist ideologies that have been growing as of late, and independently acting on that. I don't know what this shitty journalist seems to be identifying as cells or members, but even using the term cell really is a terrorist vibe, doesn't it? This fear-mongering about supposed Antifa sowing destruction with all 800 of its members is straight out of the conservative playbook. It couldn't possibly be genuine social change that's scaring your tiny little old Christian man brain into inventing a boogeyman to villainize it, could it? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Everyone that flies an Antifa flag is just some 20-year-old with a free weekend, not some domestic terrorist planting bombs in cars. Hell, it's literally anti-fascist. Do they want fascists to thrive?
That's the Pareto principle. A small number of agents in any organization, or its equivalent, pull all the weight.
Peterson decides to call upon some more pop psychology, but this is more pop economics. So like, how small of a percentage of evildoers is 800? It's already such a vague application of it. Like, what the hell are we defining as destruction? The protests against police brutality? Peterson is using some vague application of an observational phenomenon that relies on heavily cherry-picked data because his followers will continue to think he's smart when he says it.
Have we built so-called communication systems that are capable of destabilizing our entire society?
No. I mean, there is evidence that social media can be used to incite horrific things, like in Myanmar with Facebook, but half of adults were using it, and moderation policy was clearly very lax. But like 20% of adults use Twitter. I cannot stress enough to you, Peterson, how little it actually matters. When the US president tries to stage a coup, and failed, they banned him. Most people barely think about Twitter, let alone use it to decide on their political views. They let a shitty TV personality brainwash them instead, like Tucker Carlson.
The mental health data certainly indicate that a major toll has already been taken on female adolescents. What about the rest of us? What about our social institutions?
Well, Peterson, I would hope that our social institutions have a little more resilience than an adolescent girl. You may have the emotional maturity of a 12-year-old girl, but the rest of us are more than capable of handling social media. I myself find it easy not to complain that I can't jerk off to a model that I saw on Twitter.
That we should at least consider a push to conduct research on the matter, with an eye to conceptualizing, designing, and improving social media sharing platforms that aren't prima facie insane.
I agree with him here at least. Research is good. I don't know what the fuck is going through his head, throwing out Latin phrases like prima facie, which just means at first glance, but yeah, I'll drink to better understanding how social media affects us, even if it's done with weird, fatalistic reasons.
We must do so before our new, and in some ways miraculous, mass communication systems pollute the social world beyond repair.
Oh, Jesus Christ, stop doing that. You can't just betray your audience with a jump scare when they've been paying close attention trying to solve riddles from some old man with an inflated ego. It's downright criminal.